All right, I think we'll make a start. Welcome everyone to this 2024 Dementia Australia Research Foundation grant information session hosted by the Sydney Dementia Network in collaboration with the Dementia Australia Research Foundation. It's a real privilege to chair this session alongside Dr. Jacqueline Wesson. My name is Johannes McCullian, and I'm a research fellow as part of the Healthy Brain Aging program at the University of Sydney. And it's, yeah, again, a real privilege to host this the webinar and to provide as much information as we can on the current round of grant opportunities. And we're going to talk about them in a few moments. But to begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of land on which we meet today and recognize their continuing connection to land, water, and culture. The Sydney Dementia Network are in the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge their sovereignty was never ceded. I also extend this respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples participating in this webinar today. And of course, I encourage you to include the name of the lands on which you are joining us from today in the chat below. As I said in the beginning, the purpose of this webinar is really to give as much information, tips, and tricks around the current grant round opportunity. As you can see that it's only a month away to the closing time. And I was just talking with Dr. Annette Moxey just a few moments ago, and it seems that this round of grants by the Dementia Australia Research Foundation is the biggest so far. As you can see, there's up to 9 project grants available, 4 postdoctoral fellowships available, 2 mid-career research fellowships, 1 clinical practice postgraduate stipend, 6 travel grants, as well as 1 research translation grant. And I'm sure Annette's going to go into more details in a few moments. But today's, webinar, we've tried to put together a webinar that brings in previous recipients so that they can provide their tips and tricks on how they were successful, things to be mindful in their application. And then, of course, in this webinar today, we're going to be dedicating half of the session to a Q&A. So what I will say is that if there's any questions that come up, feel free to jot them down. And as it is a webinar, there is a Q&A function below. Feel free to pop your questions there, and then we'll answer them in the Q&A in the second half of the meeting. But just to go through the agenda, we're going to begin with Annette, who's the General Manager of the Dementia Australia Research Foundation. And then we're going to move to Jane and Dennis, who are previous and current members of LEAP. And then Olivier, who is a previous DARF scientific reviewer, is going to provide, his insights. And then we are going to go to the awardees panel. So Amanda, who was a recipient of a project grant, Pradeep, who's a current recipient of the prestigious RAD Fellowship, and Edwin, who's a current recipient of the Mid-Career Fellowship. And they're going to provide their perspectives on the application. And again, their tips and tricks to hopefully aiding you in your application this year. But that's enough for me. It's a great pleasure to welcome our first presenter, Dr. Annette Moxey, who's the General Manager of the Dementia Australia Research Foundation, who's going to tell you much more about the opportunity this year. Thank you, Annette, and over to you.
What can you see?
We can see your slides.
You can see my slides. They've turned up on
Beautiful.
a different monitor, as they do. But thank you so much for inviting me to talk today about our grant round for 2024. It's one of our biggest. We're around $4 million worth of funding, and it wouldn't be made possible without the support of our donors. So it's a big shout out to them who keep us going every year on year. So today I'll just talk a little bit about the objectives of the Dementia Australia Research Foundation, provide a brief outline of the program. Everything is detailed in our information for applicants booklet, so I'll just highlight some little things to know about each award and including some changes from previous years. So first of all, we fund researchers across all stages of their career, but maintain a particular focus on building the capacity of the dementia research workforce by supporting talented new early and mid-career researchers. So it's hoped that by attracting these talented graduates to the field and then retaining them, that will increase our chances of producing groundbreaking research such as finding a cure. We also do what we can to ensure dementia research is effectively translated into practice so that it provides people living with dementia, their families and carers with the best outcomes. And importantly, we encourage people living with a living experience of dementia to be meaningfully involved in research as well. So we fund all types of research. So from the causes of dementia, risk reduction, accurate and timely diagnosis, treatment and care options, increasing the awareness of dementia and ultimately finding a cure, as I've mentioned. So therefore we fund a broad range of projects, anything from your biomedical lab-based research all the way through to work involving improving the care options. So just for what we have on offer this time around, so obviously what we can offer varies from year to year based on what funding we have available. So we've got a lot of funding this year, which is great. So we're providing project grants, postdoctoral fellowships, travel grants, a research translation grant in dementia care, and also this one for the first time is a clinical practice postgraduate stipend. So what is a few things to know about these schemes? So just briefly with project grants, they are intended to help new investigators establish their careers as an independent dementia researcher. We have with small time-limited research projects or pilot projects. They also enable researchers to gather some pilot data, which may then go on to strengthen their applications to MRFF and NHMRC in the future, which is great. Another good thing is that we've increased these awards to $85,000 this year. Postdoctoral fellowships. So we've their aim again to attract early career researchers to the field and then provide them with the opportunity to fast track their progress towards becoming independent researchers. Just a few notes about this scheme. If your salary is greater than the base rate, which is at the moment $114,000 a year for salary, your university or other funding sources will need to top that up. Our fellowships are intended to be the main fellowship. So that is, you can't use our fellowship to top up something you might receive from NHMRC, for example. And also too, indexation may be applied to this fellowship. So if you're successful, the salary component may go up each year depending on what the indexation rate is. One award will be supported by Race Against Dementia in the areas of prevention and treatment. This award is geared towards lab-based and clinical research and offers mentoring opportunities through the Race Against Dementia's fellowship program. So you get to meet with other fellows from all across the world. So it's highly valuable and it's a really prestigious award and is up to 5 years in duration. So that brings me to timelines. So obviously we've got 3-year and 5-year timelines going on with our fellowships. And so I can appreciate that that can be quite confusing. So for applicants whose work addresses the aims of Race Against Dementia, either a 3-year or up to 5-year timeline will be accepted in your research proposal. All Race Against Dementia fellowships get reviewed at the 3-year mark anyway, and to make sure that there's satisfactory progress. So at that time, at the 3 years, and if your work is satisfactory, you'll be asked to provide an outline of what you're going to do over the next 2 years following that. So for the purposes of the application, I would suggest working with the timeline that best suits and is most feasible for your research plan. So applicants won't be disadvantaged, based on whether they've provided a 3, a 4, or a 5-year timeline. So that's fine. The other aspect is that an interview is required as part of the Race Against Dementia Fellowship. However, we may conduct interviews with other fellowship recipients if the scoring is very similar and they're very competitive. So just to work out who the recipients will be. But if you're asked to complete an interview, it's important that your presentation is clear, it's engaging, and it's delivered in a way that people without a scientific background will be able to understand. The next round of fellowships is our mid-career research fellowship scheme, and that aims to support researchers to continue their progress towards becoming an independent researcher and leaders in the field. So it always also provides researchers with the opportunity to establish their own research programs. Again, if your salary is above what we have on offer, your university or another funding source will need to top that up. And again, indexation may be applied. One award is supported by the Royce Simmons Foundation, and he's particularly interested in biomedical and clinical type work. And as mentioned as well, an interview may be required. This is the second year that we've had this scheme running about travel grants, and they're to assist researchers to travel nationally and internationally to learn new techniques, build networks with well-known research teams, and enhance their professional development as a researcher. There is a new web form for the travel grants this year, so this is more tailored to capture the relevant information to this scheme. Although the award aims to promote the applicant's professional development via travel, there are still opportunities to involve people with a living experience of dementia in the work. For example, you could have people with a living experience of dementia to be co-presenters at a conference. They can review materials to disseminate the outcomes of your work. You could meet with advocacy groups in other countries. Or even, have them review your travel application in the first instance to make sure that it makes sense. So you can also refer to how people with a living experience of dementia were involved in your previous work, which might form the basis of your travel application, or you might be doing some extra work as part of your travel application. So there's a few opportunities there to address that, criteria, which we really like to see. Travel duration is about 6 months or up to 6 months. And if visiting another institution, a brief letter of support from that institution or department agreeing to host your visit must be provided at the time of the application. We're nearly there. So we've got our research translation grant. So Dr. Stewart and Bonnie Bartle are kindly supporting this work, or their family is supporting this work, and that their value, it's increased from last year, so it's $200,000 this year. So the project should focus on moving evidence along the pathway to practice to improve the outcomes of people living with dementia, their families and carers. So for example, you can have a project that might be looking at the real world evaluation of interventions or a strategy that might have been subject to some pilot work previously, or you might be looking at adapting something that's been evaluated in another country and to see if it works in the Australian context. So as research translation might involve, partnerships with industry and implementation science experts and the like, and other stakeholders, up to 10 investigators can be included on the application. The main change from last year is that this time a senior researcher can lead the project, but the criteria is that they must include an early or a mid-career researcher as part of the project team. And finally, we have a new award, which we will trial this year, which is the Clinical Practice Postgraduate Stipend to support a health professional undertake a PhD and embark on a career in research. So often we see research ideas and practice improvements springing out from, observation in daily practice. So we would like to support a health professional to turn their research ideas into a reality. and give them the skills to become a researcher. So the applicant must have a clinical or health professional background. So we're talking medicine, nursing, physio, speech, pathology, pharmacy, and so on. The successful applicant will need to show that they are enrolled in a PhD prior to funding being released. And so all the awards usually scheduled to start around the March time. So we've got time over Christmas to sort things out. And the funds may be used to cover salary or backfill your salary, or just any other research activities. And the award can be taken in conjunction with another scholarship. So finally, just some general things to know. I think I might have said some of these last year as well, but there's a 2-page career summary to be uploaded as part of the application rather than a CV. So this provides an opportunity for you to showcase your career and impact to date and the importance of your top public publications. Dementia researcher is a small but growing field, so it's also important for us that we manage conflicts of interest really well and ensure that the review is free of bias. So to ensure that we provide the best possible review of applications, we ask that the research proposal and some other sections of the application are de-identified. So we provide some tips on that in our Information for Applicants booklet on how to do that. But, for example, don't include your name in the header or footer of your research proposal. But never fear, there are places that you can indicate the collaborators that you're working with and other institutions, such as the knowledge translation section. Fellowship applicants can still talk about their team and previous work ideas and future secondments in the career progression section of the proposal. So rest assured that, although your methodology will be reviewed separately in the first instance, it'll all come together with your track record as the review moves through. We also, since 2014, have scientific panel membership has included people with a living experience of dementia. They review 4 sections of the application, including the lay summary, the implications, the knowledge translation, and how well people with a living experience of dementia have been included in the research. And so their review actually counts for 20% of the overall score. So it's important that that section is written clearly and concisely. Dementia Australia has recently launched a new website, which you may have seen. And so we've actually adapted our online application process to go through a platform called FormStack. So we really appreciate your feedback on this. So we have an applicant survey at the end of the grant round that we'll distribute. So, please let us know of any improvements, or just contact us at any time if you've noticed that there's troubles with the website or the web form's not working. We'll fix those up as soon as possible. One difference is that there's no login process this year, but you can save your work and return at a later date. However, each time you save your work, a new link is generated. So please remember to keep your most recent links safe. Always use the link that is related to your last save. If you wish to continue to update your work, you can use a previous link, but it won't have your most recent changes. There's also a Word document available on the website if you wish to use that to work on your application offline and then copy everything across later. So given these changes, please don't leave starting an online application to the last minute, as you don't want any technical issues at 5 p.m. right on the closing date. I'll also just briefly mention that there's a couple of named awards which you might have already seen, and some of which are aligned to particular areas. So all applications that meet the criteria for these specific awards will be automatically considered. So you don't need to panic that you might be missing out on being considered for a Hazel Hawke award or something like that, for example. But there is a section in the application form where, if you like, you can fill that in and let us know how you think your work relates to these specific named awards. If successful, you might actually get to meet the donors that have supported these awards, and maybe have an online meeting with them, or they might come and see a lab and that sort of thing. If successful, any special considerations can be discussed when we prepare the agreement. So we can look at part-time fellowships for reasons such as caring commitments or health, and we can negotiate a start date if you've got other things on to work around, or if there's planned leave. Yeah, we can all discuss that at that time. And we can also provide feedback on your application. So if you haven't already asked, we can still provide feedback on last year's application if you happen to have submitted one. But most importantly, we look forward to receiving your application and inviting you to join the many researchers we have supported over the last 25 years. And that's provided a link there to our impact report that we've published on our website, which is fantastic. So thank you so much for your time today. I hope that you've learned a little bit about the program, and please do not hesitate to get in touch with us on our email, foundation@dementia.org.au, if you have any questions at all.
Thank you, Annette, for getting us started today. What a great selection of options that we've got. It does seem like there's more on offer this year than before, and I'm hoping everyone's getting organised and already organised and worked out where they're heading with their grants. Thanks. We'll take questions at the end, so keep remembering to post those at the Q&A page. Thank you. And now I would like to introduce Dr. Jane Thompson. Jane is a past member of the Dementia Australia Research Foundation Scientific Panel, and she's a current LEAP member, which is the Lived Experience Expert Advisory Panel, which is a subgroup of the Sydney Dementia Network. Lots of acronyms in that one. So welcome, Jane. Thank you very much for being with us today. And I'll let you to share your experience, please.
So thanks very much for the opportunity to talk to you all today. I'm a former carer. My husband died of Alzheimer's disease in 2007, but I've been involved actively in dementia research for some time now, since 2010, at the project program and organisational level. And I've got a strong interest in how to do what I call public involvement in research well. So I was a member of the Dementia Australian Research Foundation Scientific Panel from 2014 to 2019, and I am still an occasional reviewer. What I'd like to do today is just to offer some tips about how to meaningfully involve people impacted by dementia in research, and by that I mean people living with dementia, carers and families, or whoever is appropriate to be involved, and what I would expect as a dementia advocate reviewer in your grant application. So my first tip is about terminology. Can everyone see that slide well? That's okay. Okay, so researchers may interact with members of the public in a variety of ways, and in the public involvement space, this is generally categorised into three main ways. And you probably know about all these, but I just want to emphasise it. So engagement in research includes researchers raising awareness of research, sharing knowledge, or engaging and creating a dialogue with the public. Participation in research means being a research study participant, but involvement in research means something quite different, and it means people with relevant experience partnering with researchers and contributing to how the research is designed, conducted, and disseminated. So the research is carried out with or by people with that direct or indirect experience of a disease or health condition, rather than to, about, or for them. And the point I want to make here is don't use these terms loosely or interchangeably. They have quite specific meanings, so think about this when preparing your application. And my second tip is about meaningfully involving people in your research. So you need to demonstrate to the Dementia Australia Research Foundation that you're genuinely going to involve people impacted by dementia as contributors to or as partners in your research, and that you value their contribution. You need to say who will be involved, and you need to say how they will be involved. And I really like these useful principles which were developed by the NHS in England. And their first principle, which I think is important, is to involve the right people. So you need to involve those people who are most relevant and appropriate to your study. So this might mean people with a diagnosis of dementia. It might mean people with mild cognitive impairment. It may be people at risk. It may be carers or care partners, or people who describe themselves as advocates. And in some cases, it may be members of the general public, for example, in risk reduction research or in population-based studies. So how do you find the right people? So you might know someone impacted by dementia who has previous experience in involvement in research, or someone you've worked with already. So you could approach them, and then you could also get others through them or through other channels. You could seek examples from other researchers as to how they've approached this, or ask them to connect you with relevant people. Dementia Australia can connect you with relevant people through their Dementia Advocates program. And don't forget, the Sydney Dementia Network has our lived experience expert advisory panel, and it's a good idea to present your idea to the panel, and maybe some members might be interested in involvement in your project. And you need to say how you will select the people to be involved. So are you going to advertise? Are you going to seek expressions of interest? And then how will you decide if the applicants are a good fit? And it's really important to document all this in your application. And you also need to think about accessibility, diversity, and inclusion issues. So consider how you'll try to involve people who reflect the diversity of backgrounds and experiences that you expect your potential research participants or the people who are likely to benefit from your research to have. Also, how will you work with people in a way which is as inclusive as possible? So if you're involving people with cognitive difficulties, how are you going to support them to be involved? So the second principle, having chosen the right people, you need to involve enough of them. So enough people should be involved to provide a reasonable breadth and depth of views on the issues that are likely to be important to the people the study will aim to recruit or who it is intended to benefit. The right number of people to involve depends on the scope of the study, and it should almost always be more than one person. One person is unlikely to be able to represent the needs and perspectives of an entire group of people, and it may be unfair to ask one person to take on that responsibility. You may want someone as a lead person who might be listed as an associate investigator on the grant application, or you may also want to have a small advisory group of people with life experience. And not everyone involved in the study has to be involved in the same way. There are a range of possibilities with different people involved with different tasks, or some people being members of the project team, for example. And when you're deciding how many people to involve, you also need to think about practicality and feasibility. You need to be able to manage it. And it might be helpful to have a nominated contact person on the research team with whom people can keep in touch. And the third principle is you need to involve those people enough. So this will be different for different types of research and not one size fits all. Relevant people should be involved in as many aspects of the study as is feasible, productive, and appropriate to the research and at the right times. So ideally, you'll involve people at the earliest stage possible. So before the research begins, for example, deciding on the research topic, or in preparing your grant proposal. You also need to involve them during the research and also after the research in dissemination activities. And I won't go into what you might do at each of these stages, but there are plenty of resources available for you to access about this, and it's important to document this in your application. So in summary, don't make vague statements like, we will establish an advisory group, or people impacted by dementia will be involved in all stages of this project. As a reviewer, I'd expect you to outline who will be involved, how you will find them, how many, and be clear about what their roles will be. And just a note about involving people impacted dementia is just as important for those researchers who work in the laboratory who may not have direct contact with people with dementia, carers and families, or be involved in direct delivery of healthcare. So the same principles about who you might involve will apply. But the ways of involving people might be a little different, but they're still important. There are a number of examples of how researchers do this. For example, forming a buddy pair between a researcher and a person with the relevant experience. You might want to establish advisory groups for projects or programs of research, and also getting involved in research priority setting exercises, which generate questions that patients and families want basic science research to address. And biomedical researchers say that public involvement brings focus and context to their research. It provides good practice for their lay communication skills. It opens up public engagement channels, and it emphasises the reasons why they're doing their research in the first place. And it can also help to attract funding if the research is seen to be valued by the people who will benefit from the research. Now, some researchers might assume that people will be put off by engaging with or getting involved in basic science research, but this is generally not true, with members of the public keen to engage with research at this basic fundamental level. My third tip is about budgeting. So ideally, you'll have a budget to cover any costs associated with involvement, and even better, be able to provide at least some remuneration for involvement. And there's plenty of guidance that you can find about how to do this. You do need to check university policies and processes for paying honorariums to volunteers, because this can sometimes be quite tedious. My fourth tip is about the plain language sections. Don't lose me at this stage. It's really important that you write a clear, plain language, plain language in the sections that are going to be reviewed by dementia advocates. These are often the plain language summary is often read first by the advocate reviewers. It is not the abstract, though. Sometimes I've seen people just stick their abstract into that plain language summary. That it's not. It needs to be written in quite different language. And you need to be aware of abbreviations and acronyms and terminology and technical terms such as DNA methylation or phosphorylated tau, which most people won't really understand what that means. And this is a slightly tongue-in-cheek tip. Please beware of all these co-words. There's a plethora of co-words currently used to describe the methods by which researchers partner with the people who will be impacted by the research. Some of these are listed on these slides, and I started collecting them just for fun. It's led to a conflation of meanings and practices, and has even led to researchers coining a new term, cobiquity, to describe this phenomenon. But there are a range of current definitions, especially for the widely used terms co-design and co-production. And I would recommend that if you're going to use these terms, then explain what you mean by the term and what that means in practice in your research. So don't just say, we will co-design with people impacted by dementia, or we will use co-design principles. You need to explain what you mean. And also don't use the term if it isn't really applicable. So not all involvement is co-design, nor does it have to be. And not all that is called co-design is actually co-design. My last tip is about accessing and following guidance which is available. You're probably aware of the first one that I put there, which I think you should be able to access. I think Dementia Australia will have that on their website. There's a guide to researchers which we produced some years ago. You should be familiar with and follow Dementia Australia's dementia language guidelines. It's very important, otherwise this raises red flags for dementia advocate reviewers. And I've also put up there some new guidance from the Parkinson's UK, which is particularly for lab-based researchers, which you might find useful. And I'm sure you'll be able to access that link afterwards. So finally, these grants are very competitive, and all of those who make the first cut and will be reviewed by dementia advocates are potentially fundable. So you need to make yours stand out from the rest. A good consideration of how you will involve people impacted by dementia could just make the difference. So those dementia advocate reviews may just get yours over the line. So just to recap, my top tips to follow when completing your application that will make dementia advocates look favourably upon it is not confusing your terminology, following some good principles for meaningful public involvement, making sure you have a good budget, write a good plain language summary, aware of those co-words, and access and follow available guidance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. Thank you for those 6 fantastic tips. And for outlining those principles. Definitely very helpful. And I should just say, because I've received some private messages, that there will be a recording of this webinar. So a lot of the things that Jane has just talked about, you don't need to jot them down. There will be a recording to follow up with that will come from Shannon in a couple of days' time. And I should also mention there will also be some details around the Sydney Dementia Network LEAP panel. If you do want to kind of pitch your research and seek some advice from the expert panel, that will also be followed up in an email after this webinar. But thank you once again, Jane, for your presentation, and it gives me a great pleasure to welcome our next presenter, Professor Olivier Piguet, who's a professor of clinical neuropsychology and a current NHMRC Leadership Fellow at the University of Sydney, and importantly for this webinar, previous DARF scientific panel reviewer. So welcome, Olivier. We're looking forward to your presentation and understanding some helpful insights.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the invitation. It's great to be part of this workshop. And also, it's fantastic to see the amount of funding that is available this year, and to see how it's growing from year to year. It's fantastic. I'm very happy. I've been on the panel, or I was on the panel for about 7 years, and usually as a panel reviewer, you can sit 2 3-year terms, and I was asked to stay an extra year, which I was very happy to do, but then they decided to kick me out because I couldn't stay any longer, unfortunately. So I'll tell you a little bit about what are the things that make me tick and the things that I like, and just the tips that I've gathered along the way when reading a few grant applications along the way. Not just for DARF, actually. These tips are valid for all schemes, I think. And I think the first one, and it probably goes without saying, but it's worth repeating each time, is read the bloody instructions. They're there for a reason, you know. And why it's really important, because it's how your application is going to be reviewed. You know, we as reviewers will know the instructions. There are things we're looking for in your application. So if this information is not there, we can't score it. And so it's important for you to be familiar with the application, with the instructions, and what is required for whatever scheme you decide to apply for. And the first one is, ask yourself the question here: is the scope for my project, is it relevant for this scheme? Am I pitching the right thing to the right scheme? Sometimes, well, yeah, every now and again you read an application and you go, yeah, that's a good idea, but it's not. It's like trying to fit around what's the analogy? A square in a round hole. So it's not quite right, and I think it's important to make sure that it fits for 2 reasons. One is that if you try to apply for something that is not relevant, you're going to bloody waste your time. And so you're going to spend a lot of time putting something together that at the end of the day is not going to be reviewed favorably. So you're doing yourself a disservice, and I think you're also doing reviewers and the panel a disservice, because we are going to spend time reviewing applications, and if we feel that it's not well aligned, scores are going to suffer as well. So it's never a good idea to go, oh yes, I've got this thing that is half prepared, I'll try it anyway to see whether it goes over the line. The next one is, make sure that in your application you cover all the sections. So in here, in the booklet that you will have read, you need to outline the aims of your application. You need to have a section on the background. You need to have a section on methodology, and you need to have a section on budget. Again, we're going to score on all these sections. And then there's this aspect of translation, and as Jane has outlined, what is the involvement of people with lived experience. So when you write it's an evolution process. So start writing your application, but then go back to the instructions. Make sure that your background is there. Make sure that the methodology is clear and well outlined, and the same for the budget. And an important aspect also is signpost your application, make it clear where things are, because again, as a reviewer for us, it's much better and easier if we have a big heading that says aims, background, methodology, so then we can judge and score your application accordingly and make sure that we've got all the information. So it's all about making the life of the reviewers easy so that they can find the information they need to make sure that they can score your application in a way that is relevant and that they're not missing anything that's in there but might be buried. So read the instructions. The next one is, and Annette has mentioned that already, is start early, because it takes a long time to get to a point where you're happy with your applications, but also that your application is crystal clear to you, but also to other people who might not know exactly what your work is about. So, you know, you need time. You need time to write. You need time to let it sit a little bit so it can simmer, and you can then go back to it. And often you'll realize that there are some sections that are not as clear as you thought they were. In that aspect, it's often a very good idea to involve someone who's not directly a participant in the project. So ask one of your colleagues, friends, a co-PhD students to read the application and to see whether it makes sense. Because again, often there's some expectations, or you might expect people to know some aspects of your research that in fact they do not know anything about. So that will help you tailor your or refine your question and make it sharper and more pointy if you want. So again, I think that you can only do that with time. It's often we have a good idea, but then it needs to grow, and for that you need time. Now, the other one that is important, that's not clearly outlined, but that will also help shape your application, is these core principles. You know, what do you want to do? Why? What is your question? So it's covered in the aims, but you need to be able to operationalize what these aims are. So what it is that you want to achieve at the end of your grant applications or your fellowship. And related to that is why would you want to do that? So you need to convey the importance of your research topic. Why is it, what it is that your project is going to make a difference in terms of dementia research, what we know about dementia mechanisms or management or care support, or whatever you decide to do. And then the next one is how. So that's the methodology aspect. How you're going to achieve these aims, and what are the instruments that you're going to use, the measurements, and so on. The challenge often here for the how is how to pitch that, because you don't want to get bogged down into the very specifics of what you're going to do, what you're going to measure, but you also need to provide reviewers enough information so that they're comfortable, that they feel that you know what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And again, that's where involving someone external to your project and ask them to read this section and say, does that make sense? And do you understand what I'm going to do is important. The last bit that I think is important is, why should we support you rather than the next applicant? And that comes out through your CV, obviously, but you need to weave that in and provide enough information to, again, provide the panel confidence that you have the resources, the infrastructure, and the support from colleagues to deliver on your aims. The next one that I want to raise is think of who's going to read your application. And so the first one is, and it's been alluded to before, is that the reviewers are experts in the field. They know about dementia. And they're also people with lived experience. So you need to keep that in mind when you write. So in relation to that, avoid the cure dementia fallacy. Don't say that you're going to solve the dementia issue and that you're going to cure cancer or cure dementia within the scope of your grant. We know it's not possible. People have been working on this for over 100 years, so don't overreach. A sharp, short, focused project has much better chance to go over the line than something that is a bit of a hype and where we know it's not going to be possible to deliver. When you write your background section, I would suggest that it's okay, and it's even more so, it's recommended to jump right in. You don't need to tell us that dementia is a neurodegenerative condition affecting the brain, blah, blah, blah. Again, your reviewers and your people with lived experience will know that. So just go straight into what the issue is that you want to tackle. Janice has already touched on that. Use appropriate language. You need to know how we communicate in this space, and if you don't use the right wording and the right language, as Janet is saying, it's a red flag for reviewers, and you're going to get scored down accordingly. Related to that, also, the panel will see through tokenistic involvement of external parties. So if you want to involve people with lived experience, as Janet was saying, you need to get there early. You need to get in touch with the relevant groups through Dementia Australia or with different panels. And this is the same with associations. So don't just say, yep, we'll involve, I don't know, Hammond Care in delivering support services for people with dementia. You need to really demonstrate that your involvement of these external parties is really genuine. And again, this is something that the people with lived experience, and when they review your applications, will be able to judge. And yeah, it's 20% of your score that will depend on this. A quick word on the budget, particularly for the grant applications in particular. So be realistic. Don't try to cut down your budget or to pad it in. So it's either, or just outline what it will cost to do your research. And often the question is, well, but what if it's costing more than what I have, what the budget is allowed? And my suggestion is that it's okay to include other sources of funding and to say, well, this is what I will use this money for. And I know that it's going to cost more, but I've ensured that I've secured other sources of information from another grant, from university, from faculty, or so on. So yeah, don't stretch your budget. Make sure that you outline everything that you need, and if it goes over budget, indicate how the shortfall, how the gap will be funded. So yep, again, start early. That's my final slide. Start early. Clarity is key. Jen has again spoken about that. Acronyms. If you use an acronym, if you need an acronym and you use it less than, say, 5 times, don't use it. Just spell it out. It taxes working memory, at least my working memory, and if it is to save a few words because you need an extra line to fit your project, 5 pages, my criticism would be, well, actually, you're not doing that well. You need to be able to deliver in a clear fashion your project without using too many acronyms. And be kind to the reviewers. What you want is to have them on your side, so they will score you as high as possible. And also in that process, just remember that it's a two-step process. So in the first instance, the reviewer will classify, will order their applications in three scores. It'll be A, B, and C. And you need to be in the top 50% to get to the next step. So if your application is not clear and deliver a strong message, then you're unlikely to go over the line and to be assessed fully and to get over the final line and to get funded. Having said that, yeah, good luck. Good luck. It's worth it. And yeah, it's competitive, but I think for me, it's been a fantastic springboard to my research career. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier. It does sound so simple, doesn't it, when you put it like that? I'm going to welcome now Dr. Amanda Cross, who is an NHMRC Emerging Leadership Research Fellow at Monash University Centre for Medicine Use and Safety. And she can tell us just how simple it is. Thanks, Amanda.
I was just going to say, it's a lot of pressure following those two speakers, but I'll see how I go. Yeah, so thanks, Jackie, for the introduction, and thanks for the invitation to speak today as well. I am actually from Victoria, so joining you from Monash University in Melbourne, obviously, is located on the unceded lands of the people of the Cholan Nation, so just wanted to pay my respects to our local lands and their elders past and present, and extend that respect to anyone who is joining on the call today as well. So I was asked to speak, I guess, a bit about me and sort of how I got to the project, which I guess is a little bit of a different tact sort of to the previous presentation, so please don't tune out on me. It's got a point. So my research, I'm very passionate about my research, generally always stems from my clinical work. So I have been a community pharmacist I've had about 12 years community pharmacy experience. Was sort of having those short interactions with older adults, including those that had sort of diagnosed or sometimes undiagnosed troubles with their memory, and sort of helping and facilitating the best use of medications that we could. But in the community pharmacy space, it was quite sort of a short interaction. So I did sort of extend that and became a home medication review pharmacist, where I was able to go out and visit people in their homes and sort of, I guess, understand how they were managing their medications and sometimes the struggles they might be having, and getting that, I guess, greater story from the individuals as well as family members and carers. I started to see the same sort of, I guess, troubling medications and medication patterns and inappropriate medications in lots of people that I was visiting, which is why I actually got into research to try and find, I guess, better sort of system level ways to help support people better manage their medications and make informed decisions about medications where I guess that balance of benefit and risk is sometimes goes either way. So that's why I got into research. I am currently doing a postdoc, particularly looking at medication safety in residential aged care. And I still work clinically as a pharmacy in doing home medication reviews and medication reviews in residential aged care. And I also balance that with some, I guess, professional leadership as well, in terms of I sit on the Pharmaceutical Society of Australia national board as well. So I guess that's sort of a little bit about me. And then I guess in terms of the research background to sort of the work that I was doing, I'm presenting this today to sort of show that it wasn't, the grant round comes out, it's like, I want to apply for a grant, just going to come up with an idea. It is actually a flow of a story. And I think that story is really important to tell when you're applying for the grant as well. And so in my PhD, I identified a pattern, a number of medications which were both inappropriate in terms of the immediate harms that they could cause for people living with dementia or sort of newly diagnosed with dementia. And they were also long-term actually increased the risk of sort of mortality as well as other adverse events. A particular one of interest to me is medications known as anticholinergic medications, which I won't go into detail now, but just so in case you hear that term, that has continued in some of my postdoc work in terms of looking at the additive effect of these medications and the impact that that can have on individuals living with dementia, as well as those with mild cognitive impairment. I was fortunate enough to be on an early career research at MRFF led by Dr. Moxey from Sydney, which was looking at sort of co-designing resources and working with people living with dementia and their carers to help develop new resources to support better medication management decisions, or at least better informed medication management decisions, to really empower individuals to make those decisions together with their healthcare professionals. And that's obviously amazing. There's these great, we're developing these really good resources, but guidelines, resources, they can be a challenge to actually get implemented, translated into practice. So that's really, I guess, a really incredibly important focus of my work at the moment, that sort of knowledge translation aspect. I'm doing a number of projects looking at the role of the pharmacist to sort of facilitate that knowledge translation. So I guess all these aspects sort of built together towards my project. And then I was fortunate enough to meet Professor Joan in Japan. She actually works down the road from where I am, but we met in Japan and then we connected, and then that sort of led into our project. So I guess all those aspects together then led to my project, and the overall project aim is to co-design resources to support decision making. So not to force a decision either way, but really to allow individuals to make informed decisions. And those individuals include people living with dementia, their carers, as well as healthcare professionals, because there is a lack of resources for all those end users in this space. So making decisions, regarding the pharmacological or medication use for the management of symptoms of urinary incontinence for people living with dementia, specifically in residential aged care. So I guess you probably don't need to know the specifics of my project, so I thought I'd sort of touch on a few strategies and tips. Obviously, I'm definitely no expert, and I think the previous two presentations have probably provided as many tips as you probably need, but just, I guess, 2 cents worth from me. Ensure you are passionate about your project. I think that comes across really strongly in the writing. So this is a topic and an area that I really am truly passionate about, and I was really enjoyed writing the project, and I'm really excited to sort of get started in the project as well, because as I said, it's sort of been 10, 15 years of building to get to this point, and I'm really excited to be able to work together with really with end users and with sort of a tight team to help support this new project. As I think everyone said so far, get other people to read your application. Ideally, you should involve consumers or people with lived experience to get to read certain sections particularly. But even if, unfortunately, you aren't able to connect with those at that time, get anyone to read it, get your mum to read it, your sister to read it. Anyone can help sort of read that and provide that different perspective. When you're really deep into that topic, you might totally miss things, or you might not read it how they might read it if they've read it the first time. So just get other people to read your application. Be really careful about sort of how you articulate the need for your project. Again, if you're getting other people to read it and you say, hey, read this, why do you think it's important? And see whether that message has got across. Because sometimes I find I'm like, oh, this is so clear. And then I hand it to someone else. They're like, I don't really know what you're doing. So be really careful with that as well. Surround yourself with the right team. So I have 2 associate investigators, which complement my skills really nicely. So Joan has a lot of that sort of clinical care aspect. So she's done a lot of sort of urinary incontinence work and dignity work, and a lot of co-design work in sort of different formats as well. And my other investigator, Professor Simon Bell, has done a lot of sort of guideline development and has a lot of networks with residential aged care providers and healthcare professionals as well. So as a team of 3, we sort of complement each other's skills, and those 2 associate investigators are actually also designed there as an early career grant to help assist me and sort of grow as a researcher as well. And the last point, which I think Jane beautifully articulated, so I don't need to sort of go into that detail, but really is ensure genuine partnership. And I spent a long time on this aspect of the grant, talking to different people that have done projects similar, talking to consumers, talking to reading papers, reading other projects, other grant applications to sort of work out what worked best for my project and ensuring that I had the right skills or the right people around me in the team that would be able to support me in that process. And the other thing they said to talk about was learning and insights. I'm about 3 months in, so the project's really just started. I guess early insights, project setup stuff takes time, so plan for it in your timing, because all of that contracts, ethics, recruiting. I've been setting up a project stakeholder group as well, which is to follow through the entire project. All of that takes time, so make sure you put that into your time. Be open to learning. Every time I have a conversation with a new person with lived experience, a new healthcare professional, anyone in sort of this space, I'm learning every single time. So I'm definitely not under any assumption that I know everything in this space. So I guess just really be open to that learning. And all the folks at Dementia Australia, and particularly the Research Foundation, have been absolutely amazing to work with so far. And I was fortunate enough to have a conversation with one of the people that sort of supports the Dr. Stewart and Bonnie Bartle Foundation, which is supporting my project, earlier in the week, and that was really amazing and lovely. So I really enjoyed that opportunity as well. But yeah, that was it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for your presentation. And it's a great pleasure now to welcome Dr. Pradeep Manuneedhi Cholan, who's the current RAD Fellowship recipient. Pradeep, if you're there, feel fantastic. Looking forward to hearing your presentation.
So I hope you guys can see my slides. It's moving. All right. Cool. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me into this panel. So I was awarded the Race Against Dementia and the Dementia Australia Research Foundation this year. It was a long process from the time of like submitting your grant till the interview process. So I thought I might just, talk about my experience throughout the process and maybe offer you some tiny advice. So when we talk about applying for fellowship, we need to do two things. One is sell your project, and the second one is sell yourself. So I thought because we need to sell ourselves when you're applying for a fellowship, you need to tell why you are the right person to do this project and not anyone else. In that aspect, I thought I'll share a bit about me. So I'm an early career researcher. I finished my PhD in 2019 at the Heart Research Institute and University of Sydney. And my topic was, looking at the vasculature and atherosclerosis. And my first postdoc was at Centenary Institute from 2019 to 2021, and where I looked at the gut microbiome and the vasculature again. And finally, now I'm at my second postdoc from 2021 till now at Macquarie University at the M&D Center. And here I'm focusing on the gut-brain axis and neurodegenerative diseases. As you would have seen from my topics, there is a bit of skill transfer there. And this is something which I think as an early career researcher, you need to highlight from the time you started your honors or your masters till now. What are the skills you learn and how you're bringing those skills into your project right now? Like for instance, with my PhD, there was a lot of atherosclerosis disease modeling in mouse, which is basically mouse and heart. And then my first postdoc was again, it was atherosclerosis modeling in zebrafish and observation of the gut, which means it was I was mainly looking at the heart and the zebrafish. And then finally, in my second postdoc, I moved on to looking at zebrafish disease modeling and the role of gut-brain axis. So, as you can see from this slide, I always had 1 foot in my previous job or my position when I moved to the second job. And when I first started my first postdoc, I was introduced to this, the zebrafish gut microbiome model, and I got the opportunity to develop it. And when I moved on to my second postdoc, because I was very much invested, emotionally, you might say, to learning about this, learning and utilizing this zebrafish gut microbiome model, I actually, kind of pushed my supervisor to let me use this zebrafish gut microbiome model to study any disease for that matter. And then because I was at the M&D Center, I got the opportunity to study ALS and Alzheimer's disease. So with that, I would like to talk a bit about what are some of the tips in regards to project designing. Now, first, be mindful on how much you can complete in the given years. So you might either have a 3 to 5 year. As previous people have said, don't say like, you can cure Alzheimer's disease or, cure dementia, but you want to say like what your project can actually have an impact, like so that, scientists in the future can take on your project and move on and find more, improve. Next, so in my when I was writing my project proposal, I found that it was very helpful for us to have an executive summary, which basically explains in brief, which is a one-page summary where I explained in a paragraph on what the background is, what's the gaps in the research, what were my hypotheses, and what my aims was. In the first page, it was like this brief overview before I went on to explaining what each of my aim and what my background actually was. The other thing which I would suggest you guys do is to have independent aims. Try to have independent aims. Sometimes it's not possible, which when I mean independent aims is that maybe don't tell that only if you solve aim 1 will you actually be able to proceed to aim 2. Sometimes that might put you in a bit of a pickle. I would also suggest, like in the first page of your project proposal, have a schematic representation of your project. So this was one of the a figure which I had, which basically should explain to a person not just a scientific person, but any person looking at your proposal as to what is your complete picture of what's happening in your project. And I would also suggest you guys at the end of writing all your aims, have a paragraph on risks, and so that you are showing the researchers that you have thought through this project clearly, and you talk about your risk and how you're going to be mitigating them. I would also suggest you guys, especially if you're designing a 5 or a 3-year program, have a timeline and of course a budget. Now, grant refinement, this is something which everyone else also talked about. Start early. I think it's around a month left until the submission date. So, so Dementia Australia is one of the few organizations where I was fortunate enough to get feedback. So when I applied for this grant 2 years back, I did not get the project grant, but I got very important informative feedback, and I was able to get the feedback, review the feedback from last year's proposal and incorporate it into my current proposal. Then write your proposal. Now, I know that we have the tendency to just show our proposal to our supervisor who gives us comments, and then we try to incorporate the comments. But both yourself and your supervisor are very close to the project, which means sometimes neither of us will be able to see a major gap in the project. So at Macquarie University, I was fortunate enough where we had this group where we exchanged all our projects within the group, and other senior scientists were looking at my projects, and they blatantly told me that there were so many gaps within the project, which was very, very informative for me, because then I knew that I could fill these gaps quite easily, but I wasn't able to see those gaps because it's your project, you're too close to it. Now, whilst all of this is happening, I would suggest to you guys to also be working on your lay project summary. The moment you finish your lay project summary, I would ask you to approach the Dementia Advocate Program. Now, I know they have explained what the Dementia Advocate Program is, but in terms of a basic scientist, we always have this question as how can we involve the advocates in our program? So first, you need to show some initiative, like you just don't want to say like I will involve the advocates after I get the grant, but I want to they will like to see how you involved the advocates even before you submitted the grant. So once I actually wrote this project summary, I contacted the Dementia Advocate Program, and I had a mini interview with the Dementia Advocate coordinator, who then advertised my my project amongst the dementia advocate people, and she put me through to two advocates. One was a carer, another person had mild cognitive impairment, and I had individual meetings with these dementia advocates, and I would say actually it was really, really helpful, because when they got to read the project summary, they actually tell you like whether they were able to understand what you're actually saying. And more importantly, I felt it was it was a very nice bonding experience for me with the dementia advocates, because sometimes because you're stuck in the lab and you're stuck with your own projects, you don't realize what kind of impact you can have on people. And these interactions with dementia advocates actually help give you a moral boost to, like, push on with your work. And whilst applying for this dementia advocate program, and whilst having all of this conversation, one of the important things which you need to be asking yourself, or important thing which you need to have an answer to, is how will you be able to involve the dementia advocates in your project? Now, this, I think sometimes I got confused with involving dementia advocates as participants for your study, but that is not the case. How will these people have a direct impact on your project? How will, you can talk about these people can form a steering committee for your project, but then what will the steering committee actually be doing? How many times will you be meeting throughout your projects? And will you be having, will you allocate a certain budget for your dementia advocate program? All of these things need to be considered, and all of these things need to be written in your research proposal, because just saying you're going to involve dementia advocates does not prove anything and does not show that you have thought through this entire process. But having an allocated budget, having an allocated timeline where you're going to be meeting them, how many people are you going to be involving, and how are you going to recruit these people? So these are the questions, when you answer in your research proposal, gives the reviewers confidence that you're going to be following through. And so because I was selected for the Race Against Dementia, you have another hurdle to pass through. You got selected for the interview. I think it comes like first or second week of December. What's next? Well, you panic, and then the next step is, like, because you're given almost like a week to prepare. So it's a 30-minute panel interview, and I got advice from previous Race Against Dementia fellows, and then I needed to present a 10-minute talk. It's almost like a TED-style talk, where it needs to be in layperson terms. Even though your panel is going to be consisting of scientists, they will majority be having a lot of, like, dementia advocates and Race Against Dementia representatives. At this stage, they've called you for an interview because your proposal is very good. So now they are judging you as a person. So you need to convey that you are a very passionate person who is very much invested in your project, and you need to convey all of this in layman terms. And finally, if you get to this stage, I would be more than happy to give you more tips on how the interview went. And finally, I would suggest that, I know this seems a bit of a cliche, but persistence is one of the key thing. You need to be consistent and passionate about your work. Since 2019, after finishing my PhD, I had applied for 11 grants as principal investigators, and I lost count of how many I applied as CIB. And this was my one successful grant. And but the one good thing is, like, every time I apply for a grant, if I get a rejection, it's fine, but sometimes I don't get any feedback. But for certain grants, when you get feedback, you need to keep on improving from the previous year's grant. So sometimes when I go back and see my 2019 grant, I'll be like, okay, it makes sense why I didn't receive it. But feedbacks are rare. When you get it, make sure you apply that feedback into your project. And as I said previously, start early so you can incorporate the feedback given to you by senior scientists. So, and in terms of, like, lay summary, I would suggest you guys to, as previously said, show this paragraph to your non-science friends, or your parents, or your partners, and so on, so that they understand the project, because that is very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Pradeep. Lots to think of there, and I'm glad that you're offering some extra support for people who might get an interview. Thank you. I'd like now to introduce Dr. Edwin Tan, who is the Henry Brodati Mid-Career Research Fellow and Senior Lecturer, and he's at the School of Pharmacy at Sydney University. Thanks, Edwin.
Sorry, I just want to move you guys over there. So Can you see my slides okay? Yep. All right. So thanks for the introduction and the opportunity to speak to you guys today. So as Jackie mentioned, I'm going to be talking about applying for the Mid-Career Fellowship. And I'd just like to again thank the Dementia Australia Research Foundation for awarding me this fellowship. So just as way of background to put everything in context, I'll talk a little bit about my project. So my project's looking at co-designing a personalized medicine calculator to improve antipsychotic prescribing in people living with dementia. And there were sort of three key aims to this project. So firstly, understanding some of the drivers of antipsychotic use in this population, determining the benefits and risks of these medicines, and then creating tools for clinical practice. And as you can see here, I'm using a range of different methods. So it's a mixed methods project using population-based data linkage studies and some qualitative studies, as well as a sort of co-design component at the end with a small sort of impact analysis, so that the outcome of this project would be the sort of evidence-based co-design calculator that would assist clinicians in prescribing antipsychotics, as well as some resources for those living with dementia and their carers. So that's just to give a bit of context about my work. But I'll get straight into, I guess, the nitty-gritty of the application process. So I think one of the first things I noticed with this application is that there are a lot of components to it, which the others have kind of talked about. So as everyone has said, make sure you read the guidelines quite thoroughly and start early. Some of the different components that you will need to complete include some information about you and your AIs, as well as the roles of the AIs on your project. Obviously the research proposal. There's also sections on the abstract, knowledge translation, plain language summary, implications of your research, and how people living with dementia will be involved. For the Mid-Career Fellowship, there's also a section on career progression statement as well. So just make sure you're familiar with everything you have to do. I then thought I'd give a bit of practical advice on how I structured my research proposal. I'm not saying this is exactly how you guys should do it, but this is kind of what worked for me. So this is how my project looked like, proposal looked like. You get 5 pages and then I think a page for references. So in terms of how I broke it up, I firstly had the title, and then I started off with the problem. So I had it in kind of just 2 short paragraphs highlighting, I guess, the significance of the problem I'm trying to address. This next part, research vision, as you can tell, I applied for the investigator grant and this was kind of like what's used there. This isn't saying that you need to use it for this application, but I think it's kind of nice to show what your overall vision as a dementia researcher is and what your plan is for the future. I then had my aims 1, 2, and 3, and then I actually had a bit about outcomes. So what is the actual outcome for my project? So straight away, you can see as a little, as Pradeep said, a little executive summary of what your project's about and what it aims to do and the outcomes. The other things I wanted to highlight about myself were the unique resources I had access to. So my various networks and infrastructure to uni, data access, all those sorts of things. So I actually put that on page 1 as well. So my unique resources. Then moving on to the second page, I had this little section highlighting how my research is priority driven. So I mentioned how I had done some prior work with consumers and clinicians to see what they saw were research priorities. And I also mentioned how I consulted with the LEAP panel as well. So I put that quite early on as well. And then I went into my background. With my background, I had, again, tried to make it very clear and had 3 sharp paragraphs. And what I did was I structured it so that I identified what was a knowledge gain based on my review of the international literature and how that kind of matched with my aim 1. So I had knowledge gap 1, 2, and 3. So essentially I'm trying to signpost to the reviewer, like, this is a knowledge gap we've identified, and this is how our aim of our project is gonna match that. And then when I was talking about my research methodology, I kind of gave an overview of the research plan with a figure, as you can see there. Next parts of the methodology, I included a section on how I would bring together a steering committee. And then also, because my project uses a range of different data sources. I kind of thought it would be easy just to put them all together in one section. And then I had, for each of my aims, a project which matched that aim. So for example, project 1 matches aim 1. And for each of those sections, I provided a little like sentence on the rationale for this, the aims, the methods, and the expected outputs. So I repeated that throughout each of the different projects, as you can see here. So it's all very clear and easy to read. Include figures and things as well to highlight what you're trying to do. And then on the last page, I had this section on translation into policy training and practice. There is a separate section of the application about knowledge translation, but I was able to sort of integrate it into here. So it's up to you if you think that would work. And then I had a section on the budget. As mentioned before, if you're able to include funding from other sources, I think that's a really useful way to supplement the funding from Dementia Australia, and will kind of strengthen what you're able to do for your project and just a sort of feasible timeline. So that's basically how I structured it. In terms of tips, a lot of this has already been covered, but I think it's always good to reiterate. So firstly, thinking about why your project is important. So I think one of the first things you need to do is make sure that you're addressing an unmet need. So there's this sort of gap that you've identified that's important and needs to be addressed. I've just got here some of the comments from my reviewers. So they've said, you know, if there is no tool for this problem, then this is certainly an important research topic. Any guidance and education resources to better manage the use of these drugs is clearly very beneficial. So just make sure you identify those gaps and you know how you're addressing them. The second thing is making sure that it's actually, your research is actually priority driven by both consumers and clinicians. So we had done some background work about this, actually doing some qualitative work and surveys, trying to get consumers and clinicians to really rank what they thought were the key issues around medications and dementia. And I was able to say, you know, improving antipsychotic use was one of the top 10 priorities, for example. Tip 2, what and how will I address this? So I think one thing to make sure is that you have some sort of meaningful outcome or impact from your research. So again, we're not saying you're going to cure dementia, but you're creating something that could lead into that or a change in practice or something like that. So I think I was able to show that my research was going to lead to some sort of tangible output. And one of the reviewers mentioned, you know, this is potentially impactful program work. Make sure you have a very clear, scientifically rigorous methodology, just to show that what you're doing is achievable and feasible in the time, and that you do it in an appropriate way. So as this reviewer says, there's a clear pathway to a potential tool which could inform clinical decision-making. The project is of interest and the methodology is appropriate. And as mentioned, it's very important to involve consumers. And again, this will depend on the type of project you're doing and how they can be involved. So for myself, I consulted consumers quite early on through the LEAP panel and through some of the qualitative work. In terms of the actual project, I'll be doing some qualitative interviews with clinicians and consumers, and also involving them in the co-design when we're workshopping how we're going to develop the final tool. So as this reviewer says, involvement of people living with dementia and all their carers is very good. Tip 3, why am I the right person for the job? So I think with the mid-career fellowship, I'm not sure with the other things that you apply for, you do need to provide a career summary, which is like a 2-page CV. So make sure you really draw on, I guess, what's relevant to this application, and make sure you emphasize that you have a strong track record of publications or grants which are relevant to this scheme. The other thing is make sure it is about you, but it's also about your team. So with the mid-career fellowship, it's about supporting you to progress to become an independent researcher. So what I did was ensure that the AIs on my application came from a mix of different expertise. So you might have clinicians or you might have experts in certain research areas, so make sure you do that. They also need to be, I guess, mentors for you. So you're essentially still being sort of supervised to an extent. So you want to pick people who are leaders in their field. So for example, in my project, I've got 3 AIs. So I have Professor Li-Fei Lo, who's chair of the Sydney Dementia Network. I've got Professor Sarah Hilmer, who's our chair of geriatric medicine of the Sydney Health Partners Clinical Advisory Group. And I've got Professor Christine Liu, who's chair of clinical pharmacy. So I think trying to get people who are leaders in their field and who can provide good support for you is really important. Next is highlighting the sorts of resources you have access to. So as mentioned, expertise from your AIs, but also your broader network of collaborators as well. Make sure it's sort of multidisciplinary. I think ensuring if you can draw on the roles that you might have, whether you're working on certain committees or things like that, I think that's really good to highlight. And things like infrastructure you might have access to. For me, it was around data access, and I kind of highlighted how I had been able to gain access already to the data so that the project would run quite smoothly. Tip 4, as I think everyone has mentioned, make sure you get this reviewed. So I've just listed a few different people who should ideally review your application. So I mentioned consumer advocates, so do this early on. So the Sydney Dementia Network has the as mentioned, the lived experience expert advisory panel. So I got them to look at my proposal, check that it was sort of a priority area for them, and I've received some really good feedback from them. The other group I reached out to was the BMC, the Brain and Mind Centre. So Claire Hughes from there offered to review my application, and she provided really good feedback around the wording of the application, making sure I used dementia-friendly language. She also highlighted things that I hadn't really considered, like my actual access to this really broad Sydney Dementia Network, and which would aid with translation and all these sorts of things. So that was really useful. Obviously, your AIs should review your application, but as everyone else has said, make sure you get it reviewed by people outside your field. So I got my partner, I got my brother to have a look at it. And yeah, I don't need to comment again, like you guys know all this. And lastly, just give it a go if you think it's a right fit. I find a mid-career stage very challenging. I find you're in between being this early career researcher, being a senior researcher. So it's hard to find, I guess, funding opportunities that are quite unique to this stage. So this was a really good opportunity. As others have said, I've used this application several times. It's been reworked. And yeah, I was very fortunate to get it for this particular round. So yeah, just give it a go. And good luck. And feel free to email me if you've got any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Edwin. Thanks very much. This is a comment, first of all, from one of our members of the audience saying thank you very much for that blocking breakdown of the application. That was a great strategy to pass on some of your knowledge and success strategies for success. I also have another comment about reaching out to some of the speakers, but you'll find that the email invitation has university profiles and connecting details that you can chase people up if you want to have further conversations after today's event. Thanks everybody for our great sessions already, and so much sharing of pearls of wisdom. I think we might actually call it the Start Early Talk next year. But we will now go across to some of the questions. And so I think, Annette, let's start with you. There's a few questions around a couple of things. One is about the very limited number of AIs on the grants and how to, I guess, juggle that with research team, with people with lived experience. And there's a lot of competition for those limited spots, if you like. And the other question, if I may, is around applying for one grant, for example, the translation grant, but they're not getting that and then potentially being eligible for a different grant, like a project grant. So could you comment on both those things, please?
Yes, not a problem. So with the translation and the project grant, and it's also relevant for the fellowships as well, because you might be eligible for a postdoctoral fellowship and also applying for a project grant. I would recommend that you submit an application to both schemes. So you've increased your chances of being successful. However, if you are successful on both, so if you submit a postdoc and a project grant and they both are chosen to be top ranked and for funding, you'll then have the opportunity to choose which one you want to accept. So the same would go for the translation grant as well. If you've submitted two and you're the lead the lead chief investigator on them, if you've done two and they're both successful, you'll have to choose one. So only one CI can get an award in each grant round. The exception is travel grants. We're allowing everyone to submit an application for those. With regards to the number of investigators, if you've got a fourth person who is a person living with dementia and you want to include them as an investigator, I recommend talking about them in that section of the application, which is how you are going to involve people with living experience of dementia in your work. And you can get them to sign the endorsement form just by having a second page. So you just print that page the second time but submit it as one PDF. If it's a researcher, this is something we can look at in the future. When these grants first started out, they were $50,000. And at the time, we thought it's only a $50,000 grant. You don't need a cast of thousands to be on this application. So now that they're starting to increase a little bit, we can look at having extra investigators. But I think you should really nail your team to the right people that you need to progress the work. And it doesn't mean you can't include other people at a later date. It's just for the purposes of the application. But yeah, happy to look at that in future years and mention it in the applicant survey at the end of the year or end of the grant round.
Thank you, Annette. There are some questions here around basic or fundamental research, and also should say that when I guess everyone was registering for this webinar, there were some questions and quite a few questions from basic scientists saying, how likely is it as a basic scientist will I be successful for in my grant application? And it's great to have Pradeep here to see that it is possible, and not only possible, but to receive a very prestigious fellowship, the RAD Fellowship. And there's a question, I guess, what can lab-based or preclinical researchers do to make their application stand out as in regards to the translatability and the impact for their projects? And I think perhaps if I could ask Pradeep to comment on this, as well as Olivier as a DARF panel reviewer. If you have any thoughts on that, that would be great.
Yeah, I did see that question as well. So I'm lucky in that way, being a basic scientist. My project, however, deals with the gut microbiome. So it's a very trendy topic where it's about diet and stuff like that. But then I'm taking the diet into a basic scientist, laboratory environment. I think when you're talking about your project, I think it's more of a very macroscopic view. I know I told you guys, you're not going to say like you're going to solve the issue, but then if you're dealing with a protein, like maybe think a few steps ahead and say that if I solve this, if I discover this protein interaction, like what is that going to be leading to? Like think like 3 or 4 steps ahead. And in your dementia application, with implications, that I think there's one of the questions in regards to implications. Just think about what are your outcomes, what are your innovations, and what are your significance. So those, if you answer those 3 questions, I think that might direct you into thinking how your project might have a direct impact on the community.
Thanks, Pradeep. And Annette, just perhaps just to put you on the spot, is there a statistic around the breakdown of those people that apply for a DARF a grant, around those that are perhaps basic science or fundamental science focused and clinical? Do you have anything on top of your head?
Yeah, I think it's in terms of applications, it could be roughly half and half, but I will say that the panel, when assigning the awards, we make a conscious effort to award half as lab-based biomedical work and half is clinical psychosocial work. The categories we have at the moment is discovery and human-based work. So we do, yeah, lab-based work isn't disadvantaged. We try and offer,
Of course.
fund equal, projects in each
Wonderful.
area.
Thanks,
Great,
Annette.
thanks. A question for Olivier. That somebody's asked us, how do you balance both including enough scientific information to show understanding and competency, but tailored for the reviewers to understand your research proposal?
Yeah, tricky. One way one way to approach that is to look at what I would call the real estate in your application. You know, you have 5 pages. So what I do is at the beginning of writing a grant application, I'm thinking, well, how much space do I want to dedicate to each particular session, or how much space do I need to dedicate to each particular section? So, you know, 5 pages, you go, well, half a page, I need to, the front end, I need to outline the what and why is it important, and you know, the hook to get the reviewers in and the readers in. And then so you can break that down, and then your methodology is going to be what, 2.5 pages long, or something like that. So within that, then you can break that down further. You can say, okay, I've got 2.5 pages. So what do I need to, how much information do I need to provide on each tools that I'm going to use? You know, I'm doing neuroimaging research. Okay, so I need to outline what sort of neuroimaging research tools I want to use. So the type of sequences I use to be able to measure the type of brain tissues I'm interested in. I wouldn't go, for example, into the exact parameters of your sequences. But again, it's finding the balance between these are the right tools to address the questions or to answer the questions that are part of my aims. But not, I need a number 8 key Allen wrench to tighten the torque to X number of square meters, type of stuff, which is not going to be useful at that level. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to open that question up to anyone else in the panel to see if there were any other thoughts or reflections about that. I think it's probably one of the most challenging skills, isn't it, to get the right balance between the amount of detail with the amount of explanation. Does anyone else have anything else they'd like to add?
Just one more comment on that is, and going back to what a few people have mentioned, is you need to start early. So to reach that point of clarity, you need to start early and work on your grant application often, you know, write, put it aside, come back to it, and so on. And quickly you realize how to get to that balance, I think.
Thanks. Jane, were you wanting to say something?
I was actually going to address a question which I saw in the Q&A about how you involve people with living with dementia or carers in basic science research. So, and I think relevant to the question we've just addressed, I mean, if you get people to read your application who don't have that sort of expert knowledge, that can be really helpful. But there is a question there about, you know, how can you involve people and who would you involve? And I think, you know, ideally you would find somebody who either has the disease or condition that you're studying in the lab. You could approach to invite to join you, or a carer of someone who's had that disease, and also who has an interest in lab-based research. I think there are a lot of people who are interested in that lab-based research. Don't underestimate the skills that we bring also to the research, because some of us actually have research backgrounds ourselves. My husband, who had Alzheimer's disease, was a senior research scientist with CSIRO, so he would have loved to be, if he had the ability to actually get involved in sort of fundamental science stuff. So yeah, so it's about finding someone who has that interest in that condition and also an interest in lab-based research. I've just been approached recently by a scientist who's putting in an application to DARF on a highly sort of technical topic, and just wanted to run the idea by me. And he showed me his plain language summary, and I read it and I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. You need to sort of go back to the drawing board. So we had a very interesting session together, and he, I think, has gone back and reviewed what he's writing. So find someone who's interested in that condition and also is interested in lab-based research. Invite them into your lab to have a meeting if they live in the same place, or you can do things remotely. But yeah, I think it is possible. So I don't think it's not possible to involve people in lab-based research. It is just, it might be slightly different during the research process from how you might involve people if you're doing a survey or something like that, where you will regularly get them to review your patient information sheets and recruitment strategies and all that sort of stuff. So just a different type of relationship you'll develop with that person.
It's very helpful. Thanks, Jane. It seems that the hardest bit is just that first initial contact.
Yeah.
And the great thing is that there are resources available. There's the Sydney Dementia Network, LEAP. There's the Dementia Advocate Program through Dementia Australia. And it's just really just making that first contact, pitching it, and then getting in contact. And then I'm sure from there, the ideas just flow. And then it only benefits the applicant. Thanks, Jane. Moving on to the next question, and this is for those in the panel that have received a grant. What is the project implementing journey? What is the project implementing journey like, and how much flexibility does one have in implementing their project? Opening up to all the presenters. Perhaps I might start with if there's anyone that anyone that might answer that question before naming any names. Pradeep, did you have any comments?
Like what Amanda suggested, like it takes a while for us to, set up the project and get it running. We would have, in my proposal, I did talk about what my preliminary data was, and I have everything set up, but still, like, moving on from preliminary data to actual doing the experiment takes a long time. So this is why when in your proposal, you are actually needing to state that, what can be done feasibly in the 3 to 5 year plan. Like, you don't want to state more than what can actually be done, because if something is going to take 3 months to do, I bet like in basic science, it'll take you 6 months to do. In consideration, you need to plan accordingly. I think once you get the award, I think in terms of fellowship, you have regular updates where you need to provide your reports to the Dementia Australia Foundation, stating what you've done, especially when we talk about ethics, and especially with human ethics or animal ethics, it will take a bit long to actually go through a few rounds of revisions before you actually get the ethics approved. So initial stage of the project might be a bit slow, and then you should be able to accelerate your project.
Thank you, Pradeep. And Edwin and Amanda, did you have any comments on that? I can imagine also being involved in some applications that have a clinical side to it. Ethics can take a while. And if there's any trials in terms of governance and getting registered, that all takes time. And if someone puts an application that they're going to get it through ethics and governance within a couple of months, particularly at the University of Sydney, that's such a reach. So it's about being honest and being feasible. But did you have any other comments?
The only other thing I was going to say is that I guess it's going to be project dependent, but my project is being run together with the project advisory group. So I didn't write it strictly. It has to run in an exact way, because there needs to be that flexibility, because it is that co-design process. So it will depend on the conversations and the priorities that fall out in sort of objective 1 and 2, how the project progresses. So I guess if that is the methodology you're using, being true to that methodology and ensuring you write in that way that it does allow that flexibility is really important. Otherwise, it's sort of tokenistic, that this sort of, as Jane mentioned, all the co-words, it's tokenistic if you don't allow that sort of flexibility in the project design.
Very helpful. Jackie, I'll hand over to you if you've got any questions.
Yeah, I was there's a couple of questions from for Annette that are more technical questions about eligibility criteria, stating that you can't have an NHMRC or an MRFF grant as a CIA. Is that current or past?
Yeah, that's both. So if you've been awarded something like that, even if it's in the past, then I think you're well on your way to establishing yourself as a researcher, a leading researcher in the field. So our grant's about nurturing that next generation of researcher.
Thank you. And another question about the Stuart and Bonnie Bartle Research Translation Grant, and whether that only projects related to formal care that are eligible, or will care be considered more broadly?
Yeah, it's care more broadly, I would say. Yeah. The main thing is that you're not looking at a biomedical type of research project there. It's a project that is likely to improve the lives of people living with dementia and those involved in their care.
Okay, thank you. And another one about the travel grant, and that if you're applying for the travel grant to attend a recognised and formalised course, do you still need a letter of support from the institution delivering the course?
No, for that one, for the application, I don't think you would need a formal letter of support from the institution because you're going to the workshop as an attendee. What you might need to provide to us if you are successful is just evidence to show that you've registered and they've accepted your registration into the workshop.
Yeah. And since we've started talking about ethics, we've got an ethics question. So it says that the application requests a copy of the ethics letter, but it won't be ready in time. Could you comment?
Okay. Yeah. So particularly with project grants, and I think they're also within the funding timeline for our fellowships, is that in order to get your first payment, we require evidence of ethics approval for your project, but it doesn't matter if you don't have that at the time of application. You can just click pending or in the application form, and you just need to provide us with a copy of the letter from the ethics committee once we've signed your agreement and we're ready to invoice you for the first payment.
Okay, great. Here's another technical one, Annette, about whether or not there's ever been a project grant or a fellowship awarded to a statistician or a statistical project.
Oh, no, we have had, we have awarded grants that have looked at big data and databases in the past, and I have had to, and I've received it. I don't know if they were successful, but I do recall reaching out to statisticians as external reviewers for certain grants that have come through. So we sometimes will do that if there's, conflicts of interest on the panel, or if it's a niche area that might be outside the panel's expertise, we'll reach out to experts in the field. So we've definitely awarded things looking at Medicare databases and things like that, and pulling out relationships from that.
Thank you. I've got another question that I'd like to open up to all of the panel as well, just in terms of the nominated supervisor and how much that has a relationship on the decision and the assessment for fellowships, or is it primarily about available resources? Just wondering if we could know some more about the process around, who those people might be, how it influences things. It's a hard question to answer, but would somebody, Olivier, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I can comment on that. it's a very, I'm going to provide a very Swiss response. It depends. In that, in some places, well, you know, the name supervisor or the AI will provide assurance to the reviewers that you have the capacity to complete the project. However, sometimes if you have a big name on your project, it can also backfire in that you'll have someone who we know is overcommitted or has many other projects. So the likelihood of this person really providing the right supervision is extremely small. So you really need, as an applicant, you really need to balance that. You know, do I want to put in a big name, but keeping in mind that that's how it might be perceived. So I'd be more inclined to build in the application the outline the infrastructure support that you have or where you are, the part of the lab you're in, and so on. But then as a supervisor, as associate investigator, someone who's more mid-career and who will be around to help you then get your project off the ground and will help you reach these goals.
I just wanted to mention there's different sections where you can talk about your, I guess, supervisory team or your AI team. So there's a bit at the start where you talk about each of the AIs and their role. But also with the, I'm not sure if it's just for the mid-career fellowship, but there's a career progression statement. And in there, I talked a bit about each of my AIs and how they would support me. So I think there's different areas in the application where you can kind of highlight the strengths of your team and how you'll get that support.
Even in the fellowship, there is a career progression statement. I think you need to maybe have a mix of, big names and, mid-career researchers, because especially as an ECR, you can't do everything by yourself. You definitely need, more funding from, external sources. You need inventory and so on and so forth. And a career progression statement is an ideal way where you can state what their contribution is actually going to be. Like the big name is his contribution or her contribution can be more supervisory in nature. A mid-career can have more direct impact on your project. And then, of course, if you're having any kind of collaboration, then you can have a very strong collaborative AI who is another ECR in another institute, another lab.
Yeah.
I'm just going to make a quick comment. I think this is also relevant to including people impacted by dementia in the research. I mean, there's a limited number of us, and those of us who've had quite a bit of experience get asked a lot to be on research grants. And, it's very appealing and tempting to say yes to everything. But I think you need to be sort of realistic in terms of how much we can take on too. So sometimes perhaps we might have, those of us who are more experienced might have an advisory role, but if you want enough people who've got the time and can make the commitment to do the nitty-gritty everyday work of involvement, I think, we need to consider how many people there are out there who are trained and willing and ready to be involved in research. And that's something perhaps we need to address through Dementia Australia, is actually training and upskilling more people, because we do have to have a little bit of training to understand the research process and what involvement in research really means. And at the moment, I think there's a limited number of people who've got the skills which are appropriate to being involved in all the research activities that are happening in the dementia space at the moment.
Pradeep, you talked about the academic career summary. I just want to come back to that in our few minutes that we have left. One part of the summary are the top 5 publications, and I just wanted to, I guess, ask the panel whether there was a strategy on presenting, if you had more than 5 publications, which publications to include, and then also the flip side of that, if a person applying doesn't have 5 publications, how worried should they be in filling that section? And is it, I guess, a major part of the review?
For me, because when I mentioned to you guys, like from where I started to where I am right now, I am not necessarily an Alzheimer's disease researcher as when I started out. Dementia Foundation is very grateful where they, it's very good whereby they include people from other fields into your field. So my top 5 publications had nothing to do with Alzheimer's disease. My top 5 publications had to do with the model itself, the model which I'm going to be using. My publication showed how successful the model was, so that this model can be implemented in dementia research. And I think it should. Yes, you can put your top impact factor publications, but also think about what your project is and how building confidence with your the people who are reading your grant, like how successful you have been in actually publishing in your peer-reviewed journal with the skills which is required for the current proposal.
Definitely. Yeah. Any other comments, Edwin, Amanda, on how you approach your academic career summary, or any other strategies there?
I mean, I think as Pradeep has just said, it's really choosing, if you've got options, choosing those that align closely with the project. It may not be in that field, but it's the methodology, or a lot of my work is about that translation as well. So sometimes I choose papers that I've had opportunity to translate really well. So it might be that they've been taken up in, like, the impact that they've had. So if they've been taken up in other areas, or if I've managed to, be on the radio or speak about it, and sort of how I've used that to, I guess, spread the message. And if I'm using those sort of similar techniques in the project as well, sort of showing that I'll be able to use these networks or use this mechanism to help translate this project as well.
Definitely, yeah. That's really helpful. It's not just about listing it, it's about explaining it and making it aligned with the research proposal. Definitely. Jackie, is there a final question?
Okay, yes. Look,
wrapping up.
It's all we've got time for, this wonderful, diverse world of dementia research that we all are. So I would like to really thank our speakers today for supporting our researchers, for Dementia Australia Research Foundation too for providing the funds, and wish you all the best of luck. I would also just like to mention a shout out to Shannon Camilleri, who has been amazing with helping us set up the webinar today. So thank you, Shannon. And she'll be in touch with you with details about a recording and other contact details. There are a few questions that have remained unanswered, but we will try and get to those as well. But we thank you very much for attending today on behalf of the Sydney Dementia Network, and best of luck, everyone.
Thank you. Best of luck.